Welcome to the store, a place where people come beyond reason. And today we would have a talk about modern STEAM culture and the Steamology project, the Steamology movement that emerged from Burning Man and right now emerging, finding a place for modern STEAM culture. And Peter, thank you for inviting us. And I would like to introduce Boris. Boris Ryabov is a founder of Steamology movement and Steamology Institute, a place where people learn how to be a STEAM masters.
Thank you so much, Peter. Thank you, Gosha. Really happy to be here and happy to be at the store specifically. That's an amazing place, really. So I would say it's both a talk and a dialogue at the same time. So whenever you feel you've got ideas, questions, comments, whatever, don't hesitate to interrupt, really. Put it into the chat. So the more alive you are, the more interesting it becomes. Should we start? Cool. Yeah, well, so we are Steamology, not the only identification we are using, but Steamology is pretty much an important part of our lives. Myself, Gosha, and other couple of hundred people around the globe, in Russia, in the United States, in Belarus, in other countries. And you might actually wonder what is the core thing around STEAM? Why is STEAM? What are the things around STEAM which make it so important or attractive or life-changing, whatever it is? And there is a story behind that. The simplest way to address that would be to say that pretty much every one of us, like every one of you and us, a couple of generations back or 10 generations back, pretty much in all your ancestry, had some sort of access to the STEAM culture, was an active participant of the STEAM culture. And many of us have retained that, and many of us have lost that, forgotten this experience. And you might see like it's pretty much all around. I mean, the one on the left up is what is called Pedro Formosa's in Portugal nowadays. And these are Iron Age saunas, which are ritual and hygienic constructions, like of all different sorts. And there you see a public bath of Russian style, and to the right you see a sweat lodge of Lakota style, and to the lower left you see a Temazcal, which is both Mayan and Aztec, and a smoke banya or smoke sauna of Russian style in the lower right. Well, it's pretty much all around. It's easier to name cultures which did not have some sort of STEAM culture, sweat and STEAM culture, in their village life, in their village situation, like in the low culture, so to say. And then, of course, we've got all the high culture artifacts, which are Roman therma, or which are whatever we have now in contemporary spa culture. These are all the STEAM artifacts we can see there. So it's pretty much ubiquitous. It's pretty much traditional. Like there are lots of traditions. Some of them are alive, some others are not. And yeah, I mean, Russians tend to have a better access, just like Mexicans, for example, just by the virtue of having some sort of this traditional life and embedded in our social culture and uninterrupted. One thing I can mention here, which you might actually wonder about, is that how resilient diverse and resilient is this culture. So somehow it survived. And in some cases, it's sort of sealed and survived as an oasis of tradition, transmission, like in Dakota. In some other cases, it's pretty much embedded in whatever social fabric you've got. So I had this from my early childhood, really. I had this notion of being a little boy in a father's sauna from the very childhood, and Russian bath is pretty spectacular in the sense that we are using tons of different things. We are using herbs and branches, and steam is pretty spectacular as well. So I've got this experience from my early childhood. However, little I did know about the knowledge which is behind that and the ability to create a culture. And then all of a sudden, realization of that this can be something a bit more than just experiencing banya, which is the Russian bath, made it a long social art project. And that's an interesting part, because the whole culture is resilient, the whole culture is very long, and it made itself a very long personal project in a sense. And that's a very interesting characteristic. So it never gets boring. And that's a social art, in the sense that we started creating forms around the experience we have encountered. So basically, we started off at Burning Man, 2016, bringing that particular, that one on the right to the playa. And you see it's pretty simple, however quite spacious. And we had like the first 600-700 people during the first burn, and we learned about this experience being somewhat unique. You know, like we figured out that just listening to those who are coming in and having no prior access to this culture in many respects, we understood that we are actually facing something, we are touching something which is pretty much alive, pretty much talking to us, like speaking with us, and pretty much unifying. And we started exploring the modalities of that. And since that moment, we started bringing Banya to Burning Man. First it was Steamology camp, and then Art of Steam. And it started to be a thing for the community, which was Burners community, and then spread around to other places. And you can see another banya, which was brought to another festival in Russia already. And all this is like a particular idea about building a space, but that's not the principal idea. So like building the space in this case is more of building a shell and an enclosure. The most principal thing was the experience which happens inside, and this experience is pretty much diverse. So what we figured out is a unique experience. It's pretty much multi-layered. It affects both the body and the emotional part and the communication part and the spiritual path as well. It's quite omnipotential because it opens up lots of different healing modalities or conversational modalities. And of course, it's embodied. And I'd say this is an interesting part because, like, if you are a philosopher, you've got the danger of like you still have to contact the ground, you know, like you're dealing with concepts. You have to contact the ground. You either hit the ground, like running into the matter, running into the comprehension of what is the reality around beyond all these concepts, or you can actually touch the ground in the sense that you find some embodied practice which is telling something. So this is one of these embodied practices which sort of tells much about what's happening. So it has this embodied component, and it's quite indispensable there. And this experience calls for sincerity, opening up, and that's pretty much what happened throughout the ages. And that's what's happening at Burning Man. That's what happened at Burning Man, and that's what happened to all of us. And we found out that the sensation of understanding someone else and being in the expanse of this understanding is, again, pretty much indispensable. And there is a component of going beyond something, of transcending something, be it the boundary, be it a particular tension, be it a particular idea. Needless to say, Banya really halts or steam really stops some of the usual thinking ways. We've got some of these monkey mind features without actually asking us about that. It just makes it work. And at the same time, not only the experience mattered, but as well the form around that mattered. And we figured out that it's really a living form of social art, calling into the life different ways to manifest. So that made us create a Steamology Institute, which was which became a nonprofit to educate and again working pretty much all around the globe. And again, all the names, all the ideas, all the concepts really happen to come up in the bunny itself, like within this very process, which is again quite remarkable. So it's self-propagating vehicle in the sense. Who is thinking these thoughts? That's a good question. It's pretty much humane. It relates to human nature, and we can be certain that that many times it was encountered and created throughout the human history. It's no coincidence. It is principally a social experience, and we're going to touch this a little bit later. And it has this knowledge component, and which is what makes it special in the sense that the process of remembrance of how to approach another human being or oneself happens to be the part of the experience itself if you approach it properly. So it's there is no big book of steam, like there is no Yoga Sutra of Patanjali for the steam. But at the same time, by practicing a particular type of listening and understanding, you learn about plants, you learn about steam, you learn about boundaries. So it's a very interesting self-propagating contemplative practice as well, as we learned. And that went way beyond what I have experienced as a child before that. So what is it? Hard to render, hard to find a particular word for that. Is it a social movement? Is it a path of knowledge? Perhaps a mycelium, because like it, and that's a descriptive way to deal with that, like just watching what's happening. So what's happening is the nodes are growing, the hyphae are growing between these nodes, and it's perhaps a mycelium in the way it propagates. Is it a being? Well, you've got this experience of being in presence of someone while being in the steam, which is, you might call it like being an experience of being in presence of life. Like you definitely feel way more alive after you come into the steam space, steam bath, of whatever sort. Losha, you've got anything to add right here, or I jump further? Unmute.
Interesting that that process occurs on several continents. What is Boris is telling, the same things happening in Europe and Moscow on our festivals, when the whole process like emerge during that Banya experience.
That's, as a side note, Burning Man seems to be a great catalyst for many, many interesting projects of social art. And I think I witnessed some of the speakers at the STOA telling the same. So that's just a side note as what is the training engine for emergent properties of whatever social art project. So here it is. Surprisingly, it worked with us too. So, and then you might be intrigued, what is steam? Once we're coming to that, and then steam is really a medium, and it's a medium in pretty much whatever sense you take it. It's in McLuhan's sense a medium as the message, because like you've got really you start understanding while you're encountering steam. You have a physical way to understand stuff once you encounter steam. So it's very physical. It's very as much as physical as an extracellular fluid in your body, yourself being a cell of a larger organism of some sorts. But as well, metaphorically, steam is an alchemic combination of basic elements. Again, not invented by myself. It's pretty much in all the cultures. You go to Temescal, you're going to have and then you go to a maestro of Temescal, you're going to hear a story about air meeting, water meeting, fire meeting stone, which is the way how steam is created. And then you've got this experience of creation of new being, which is an alchemic synthesis, again, metaphorically creating a medium. Now, the interesting part is that, again, it's not just the enclosure, like the process is key, and then the process is the actual art of meeting someone else. And art in the way it is like artistry, like it's something which is being learned, which is being explored. So you meet some other being, not always a human being. So you meet the being of the plant, for example, and you can be less real when you're meeting this being of the plant, because like you've got it physical in your skin, you've got it in your lungs, you've got it in your brain, and you've got it in your visions, because it's an interesting trance vehicle, which is what we are dealing with. But the other thing is the process creates a structure which creates an art form which is not chaotic. So it's sufficiently chaotic. Okay, so it's chaotic in the sense it can be autopoietic and then create itself. But the principal modalities of Kleidik and remembers and ritual are sort of key, and therefore knowledge is quite important. So I am very careful here not to say traditional knowledge, because the way traditions are born happens through the culture and not vice versa. But we're going to come to this later. Steam is a time portal, and the notion of time is being rewired, and then relaxing the usual notion of time happens through the trance vehicle. So like you really would not know how much time passed. Like you're getting into a trance-like state, a dream-like state, where the time is pretty much created rather than a fixed framework for your experience, and which leads you to open up the notion of achronic time, kinetic time, and ionic time. Kinetic time meaning like what happens right now within your own experience once you pinpoint your attention towards that, which, as a side note, makes a full sense for steam to be a contemplative vehicle as well. But as well, ionic structures opening up this universal myth of creation, like myth of happening. And here I would be again focusing on the philosophical notion of myth, because taking myth as a concept, it's really easy to say, okay, disregard myth. It's like old style thing. Okay, it's magical, mythical, whatever thinking there was. We are second order beings. But in fact, if you experience a living myth at that very moment, it's pretty much telling stuff. Yes, experiencing myth makes all the difference. And then experiencing the myth of creation, experiencing the myth of birth and of death is what makes the whole difference. So therefore, ionic structures experientially opened in within the steam space are quite important here. By the way, this is all the stuff we are teaching and showing, but I just wanted to like point to a couple of aspects of what we're talking about. Now, pacemaking is important, and then pacemaking is like what makes you want to go there once a week, for example, and that's very, very important too, because some of these structures of time are lost without us understanding the value of these structures. Not talking about seasonal changes and festivities, but the weekly structures. Somehow it's important. Not digging much into why it's important, but the pacemaking properties of steam are quite remarkable, just physiologically, but not only. And that's a very interesting memory tool. And then by saying memory tool, what you encounter because of the dissolution of boundaries, which is a very physical sensation of boundaries of your body being dissolved, and therefore the boundaries of your emotions being dissolved in steam, is that you start experiencing memory of your body as being something pretty material as your body itself, which makes it an object of manipulation. So like you start dealing with memory, you're starting opening up a memory, you're starting cleaning up memory. And that's not much different from the traditional shamanic work, which is again not much different from binary traditions in general, but here it happens through the steam itself. With adding some guidance and knowledge, it becomes a vehicle. Now, on the other end, it's not just time, it's about space. And then this space is about sense making, which is the interesting thing, because if you consider what is the process of creating meaning, is the process of really dealing with the context, like how do I refer to the context of reality? Therefore, like what are the boundaries? How I deal with these boundaries between myself and reality? Now, Steam is actually one of the most interesting tools for opening up, dissolving, and reabsorbing boundaries. Like you can easily, like that was our little bit of observational study when we started treating someone with steam and then bringing it to cold water, which is a contrast procedure, and then in 1/4 of cases having a stable stream of out-of-body experiences, which means that the person would really dissolve the physical notion of bodily boundaries. Now, then we started to realize that something is going on, and then we opened up this understanding of how to attentively deal with boundaries, which then all of a sudden changes the way you experience the sense of what's going on. So not digging much into that. And the most important part is that it is really connection to life, and which is like really hard to explain with other words. Like, how do you know that you're alive? Trust me, if you read fairy tales and narrative common Russian stories, but as well as if you experience personally, you definitely feel way more alive without having a good explanation way to say why it's alive. But you just feel more alive. Life is there, and it's pretty much a sense in itself. And that's what the revival engine and the survival engine, which is self-referential, because this culture is so resilient, it grows through whatever. It grows through tarmac, really. Literally, it grows through whatever regime was in Russia. It grows through whatever obscurity, through whatever repression. It happens to be all around. This process is good at survival. And you might be intrigued that in Soviet manuals, what you're going to do after a nuclear strike, if it happens to be successful, the first thing you do to revive the civilization would be to build a banya, a steam room. Why? Because you need to clean up the radioactive dust. So, like, in a sense, that the first thing which would be built in taiga, in the forest, and in many respects is what you would think as the survival engine. In many respects is because it has these liminal qualities. So, and hold on with me, we are approaching. If you've got questions, please go on. Otherwise, cool, okay. So, exploring encounter, which is the topic of what we wanted to discuss here, and then now you see what we're coming to. What is a non-encounter? Easy to render, yeah, like trauma and completeness, depending on the lens you're taking. Like for this therapeutic lens, is a trauma, deficiency, or some sort of not being whole, but anxiety, but as well polarization if you take it socially, loneliness if you take it socially. So steam culture, and we've got pretty good reason to believe that, because we have shown that many times for ourselves and for others, steam culture is exceptionally good at helping experience and practice encounter as the phenomenon living experienced in a very granular fashion as the vehicle to know yourself, really understand yourself, because you are really exploding your span of attention within this theme, using the trance in a contemplative manner, but as well opening up the notion of interspace between myself and yourself, literally, physically observing what happens between us and what it means to be in dialogue and contact. So because it is embodied and it has this particular miraculous dynamics, it never has a ready-made answer. So it is an exploratory phenomenon. And then in a broader sense, it's a sense of communality, of which you can have a direct perception as well, of how to be together, what it means to be together. So we are definitely advocating for communal steam. in that fashion. And history tells us that cultures which do have communal steam, they tend to be happier. Finns, Japanese tend to be happier. Be it just steam or steam and bathing, there's not much difference here, but we are dealing with steam for a particular reason. Now, then, as well, it is an art form, as I told, and it opens up a very interesting relationship between tradition with yourself and the present and yourself, opening up sort of a way to deal with traditions respectfully, but not dogmatically. Chanting, using particular herbal medicines, whatever. And the very last part. So it is a vehicle of transcendence. Again, we would argue that, well, the most concise way I would render the steam space is an arbitrarily accessible liminal space. And if you chew a little bit on these words, arbitrarily accessible means that you don't really need much. The barrier is very low. You don't need to drink something exotic, or you don't need to have 5 years of education, or you don't need to have a degree, or you don't need, like, you can access that. That's why it's so resilient, by the way. That's why it's the low cultural phenomenon in a sense. But as well, it's a liminal space, and which means that you're really at the frontier of many, many paradoxically connected opposing things, seemingly opposing things. It's both private and public culture in many respects. You can say it's private as you can say it's public. It's too open for the usual notion of public, but it's really, 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 it's really about social interaction. It's both sacred and profane. It was used for like cleaning before you go to church, but as well, this was the place for witchcraft, fiercely avoided by those who, like, it was really a fearsome place, terrorizing in some respects in many cultures. It's both clean and dirty. A person comes in dirty and becomes clean somehow. So it's a very interesting thing. The English word, there is a good English word, which has this awful terrorizing component, but as well miraculously blissful component. So that's like you've got the point where the two extremes of our experiences meet each other, and that's the and beyond good and bad. So it's pretty much where you learn this component of and because of that, it's adogmatic, because it really transcends whatever explanation. So it's really hard to say, I know about Steve. It's really hard. I mean, there is always something beyond, because it's pretty much about, I know myself to that extent. It really humbles practitioners. So it's a culture as an action, as a collective action of not just human beings, though. And it's an open multitude of subjects. You would say, are we in presence of what is not just human beings? Perhaps we are. At least we are in presence of our collective being within Steam, which is not directly the same as saying like just the aggregate of those who are assembled. So at least that we can experience, but we can experience way more than that. At the same time, the actors are inside. It's like we start having this granularity of perception of what happens inside. It seems that the body becomes not just an opaque solid object, but becomes sort of a universe in itself, not just the body, but the psyche as well. So in that respect, it's a really interesting way to think about the culture being like embodied, but as well like open internally and externally. Very much open for interpretation and collaboration, very much afraid of anything else. And pretty much a lab wherever it meets us people practicing that. So this is our view, and this is our practice. And I think I shut up for a while, and whatever questions we've got, let's have them.
I have a observation about how that culture spreads, and I remember I first time entered the Steam space and experienced that state, and that shocked me. And I've decided that whoa, I need somehow to share that with the world, because I felt alive and I wanted to share that. And within several months, I've just took that tea branches, brooms, and started doing banya. And I think there is something special in that experience, because it inspires you to share that. And we have like several people, like Yuri, he's right now on that talk. He had pretty much the same experience while during our festival banyas. He experienced it and decided to share it further. And yeah, that's how it spreads.
And I'll jump in. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to put something in the chat, or just maybe raise your hand and you can just jump off mute and ask it to Boris. And I'll start with a share perhaps question. Yeah, it's like I see the connection now like in a deeper way than when Alexei just described to me before the session. It's like, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. The steam, how it relates to these kind of sense-making, more intimate kind of spaces. It's quite kind of beautiful how that maps. And I just like want to like dive in to my local banya that I haven't visited yet. And I have some experiences with sort of like the steam tech, but never really like consciously combine sort of the bringing these more authentic modalities that we discover here in the Stoa in that setting. And so perhaps maybe you can kind of speak a little bit more about like the protocols of those conversations. Like, is it circling? Is it authentic relay? Like what it looks like, and what have you experimented with in the steam setting? And then just the other share, I think it's so brilliant, because once you hit the steam, and if you're associated with those kind of conversational protocols, the sacred space is just set in a really kind of potent way. So yeah, I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that.
The one thing that popped up in my mind is in Russia, there is a tradition that is, I don't know how to translate it, that is called like душевный разговор. It's works
soul
like a soul talk. It happens between people after banya, and it's very like deep, connected talk that feels like you are talking to a priest, revealing something very, very deep that sometimes you never know what could be revealed during that talk, and after that you feel more clean and more connected, and that like naturally happening in the banya space without adding any special conversational modalities. It just happens naturally.
Yeah, I would add to that. I think what STEAM really helps to understand is that some usual modalities of say what cleaning is are too much restricted by the materialistic idea that cleaning happens on a physical level, and then whatever happens on non-physical level is called something else and has a different process. The thing is, because in STEAM you're sort of happening to get the whole full spectrum, of active experiences, being emotional, being physical, being spiritual, being mental, the same process seems to happen at all these layers intermittently and simultaneously. So the opening up, the cleansing in terms of letting go becomes as nature as scrubbing the skin, for example. And the difference, though, is that usually we are able to understand that our skin is dirty, but it's way harder to understand that our state, which is perhaps usual, learned, it can be improved or changed or cleaned. So that's one of these modalities. It's pretty traditional, by the way. So it's really traditional. It happens to be pretty ubiquitous in different steam traditions. The way you clean a person, or like in Temescal, they've got a word for that called limpia, and then others. But that's usually one of the important protocols, how to open up and clean. And it can be a self-guided process. It can be a process which is like letting you be in the hands of the master who or the guide. The other process, which again, they can be connected or they can run in different ways, is a process of, I would say, communal contemplation of something which is happening at the same moment, like of the space, for example. This collective tuning to something, while not being guided rationally, but guided through a particular kick and experience, being addition, say, of frankincense, herbs, steam, whatever, sound, creates a synchronization process, which is healing by itself, but at the same time, by adding some attention collectively into this process, saying, okay, now look into what's happening, it creates as well a learning modality for everyone and for a person. That's another example of many of those protocols. Now, the treatment protocol, for example, would involve an idea of intentionality and the contract, which is not a written contract in that sense, but the idea of we've got a frame of communication, and we learn how to navigate this frame of communication, which allows us to basically deal with nudity in the most respectful way, which allows us to deal with violence, understanding what we should not do or what we should do. Yeah. And that's a treatment protocol where there is a particular intention and an agreement, a contract of some sorts, which happens to be installed and then dissolved at the end. There is another way to deal with steam, which is more mythopoetic, more narrative rich. When a particular story happens to be encountered, again, it's pretty much traditional. For many initiation rituals, it's narrative rich thing. However, again, this shouldn't be taken reductionist way, because in a living ritual, it culminates in a very real experience of what's happening. So the narrative is basically just a way to slide into this experience, preparing oneself for that experience to happen. So, and again, there are different protocols for that. And we can go forever. So like there are many ways to do it, to deal with that. The apparent common denominator for all that is that there is an agreement of miracles can happen modality. So this should be discovered throughout the process. Now the process can take different ways, and actually it is this encounter of miraculous nature of our reality, which means chaotic, and then perhaps theonic if you get to that, finding the underlying underlying eternal reality. But the process of getting into that needs one to agree with the possibility of miracles to happen. And now, I mean, it's way easier to comprehend than it might look like once you've got the medium which is powerful enough to make the trance state there real. The only thing one needs to do is just to point to that experience, like I say, this is it. Now that's basically the work of the guide, to not only to handle the experience, but say, this is it. Pinpointing the very particular moment for that one needs vision, and that vision is definitely something which gets opened up in a sensory deprived steam space, because we don't have much light. There is not much to look at, but for that we open up a very internal vision process. Again, that's not that exotic if you consider that we are definitely between these boundaries of dream and awake. And in that sense, you've got sort of an active dream happening at that very moment, which brings us again to the tradition of dream time of Aboriginal Australians, for example, or of dreaming in Lakota, or whatever, vision quests in Lakota. Like it's human nature. It's not really an exotic thing within a particular tradition. It's just human nature. That's the dreaming is a bit more real than we tend to think about it.
I would like to point how the STEAM practice could be used as a tool for modern communities. Because like in my practice as a STEAM guide, I have several communities who are intentionally going to Banya for synchronization or for solving some of their goals, like a Burning Man community or entrepreneurial communities. And let's explore how STEAM culture could be used for modern communities.
If that was a question,
yep,
and you suggest to discuss that, I think it's this sort of plan B question, you know. Like for that, you think you start with thinking, well, what are these modern communities? What are we guiding the whole thing towards, or what are we observing there? So I would say the experience really tells how to guide it. And like once it's embedded in your personal context, then it sort of starts being embedded in your communal context. I think a communal culture of this kind can be easily propagated. That's basically our mission, in a sense, through finding these cradles of relating, like the places where people are actually interested in relating or interested in finding each other and or themselves. By providing an embodied tool to speed up the process, make it granular, visible, and showcase what you can do with that. That's pretty spectacular. I mean, some of the effects you might have by having this level of synchronization of people after a 2-hour session is like then you've got after 2 hours of this synchronization session within the STEAM space, you easily can have one of the most profound creative discoveries collectively of whatever source, of rational sort of artistic sort, whatever. Or it might be just helping someone to recover after a long and demanding day of work, whatever, or both. or a tool to cope with active insomnia or PTSD. We had anecdotally interesting examples of that. So I don't think there is a right way, really. I mean, it's like somehow we should have patience to observe how this sort of crawls into the contemporary culture. I'm a big fan of botanical biomimicry concepts, and then like having this mycelium concept, and then mycorrhizal connections with more structured and social vehicles really makes me think what it makes this mycorrhizal connection work, and then how does the hyphae sense what's happening, and then how it actually works. And then the real answer is you have to, in a sense, if you're a mushroom, you have to get to the particular cell. I mean, you have to make it real, and then, which is translating into our social language, once it becomes a human experience, of a personal experience of someone, then he or she gonna figure it out how to make it work for the whole plant. So, and then at the same time, mycorrhizal connection means that the plants are then not even distinguishable between the mushroom and the plant. So like they're joined. They become a synthesis. They become like they're living, but they're like joined. They belong to both. So that's another way to think about it. Once it becomes something of that personal nature, then really community is going to show up. That's what we are experiencing by helping, building, and launching and exploring together with several places already. So not just Burning Man, and that's quite remarkable that Burning Man really loved that as an organization, not just as Burning Man as the event. So we built this flyer range thing, which is on their permanent property, which is one of the which became then one of the ways to propagate it through teaching those who are interested to try to practice. Yeah.
So Yuri, you had you mentioned in the chat you had a question or share for Boris. You can unmute yourself and ask it.
Yeah, thank you. Boris, can you share please your experience about to mix Banya with other body practice, or like I don't know, like tantra or yoga or anything else, like in retreats, or maybe some elements from this practice. Yeah.
I'd say well, yeah, that's a great question. So well, the question is whether, like, you can address this question from many different directions. So one would be whether it's advisable or a good idea from my perspective, or whether I believe it is possible or not. The question, the answer is going to be different. So A, I believe it is possible, like you can try. B, I wouldn't advise because or I would advise to be extremely cautious about what you're doing as a practitioner, and for a reason, because you are, as I said, you're operating in a liminal space, and then liminal space means you can shortcut to whatever. You can shortcut to whatever experience in that space. You can have a very blissful experience, but you can end up having a very dark experience, and then that's no coincidence. Steam spaces were feared in popular culture as much as they were adored in popular culture in many respects. So I'd be very careful. I'd be specifically using the word mixing. The thing with tradition and say you take a tantric tradition, which is very particular and has a very particular lineage and approach to that, because it is a fast path. Say we take Buddhist Tantra or whatever, Vedic Tantra, it's a fast path because it deals with energy. If you take like the particular worldview, this fast path means that the dangers are real, because you can fall down the cliff easily because it is so fast, because it is so powerful and transformative. By adding some more catalyst to that, you definitely interfere into what's going on. And I wouldn't do that if my teacher in the lineage I trust wouldn't tell me so, frankly. Well, that's my take about like a particular traditional approach to that. So first, I would make sure that if I deal with a tradition, I'm not really mixing it with something else. I am paying respect and observing and making sure that I am not really creating a new agey patchwork of things which may create some interesting experiences, but the experience itself is not really the goal. It's the connection which is the goal. And then if it really improves the connection to that particular practice, well, yeah, you go on, but you're on your own. You take the risks. I wouldn't. I would say like be very careful with taking an established tradition and mixing it in that sense.
Any follow-up, Share Yuri?
Oh, it's clear. Thank you.
And I have a follow-up on that, and perhaps this will be the closing question. It seems like this is really cool, this STEAM space. It's almost like, John Vervaeke's notion of an ecology of practices. It almost seems like this is like a home base for that to organically emerge with care and wisdom, and not just sort of like artificially jamming shit into it, like you just said. And so, yeah, it feels like a really cool kind of like nidus for that to be the case. And I'm curious if you have any general thoughts on what I just said there, but just like at a real practical level, like, I'm here in Toronto, Canada. A lot of people are here now or watching a different part that don't have immediate access to like maybe a space like this. How do you get into this stuff?
Oh, well, yeah, that's the best question ever, because yeah, in some places of the world you can have easy access to that, and say you're in Russia, you perhaps won't have much issues finding the right spot. Still, by getting a bit further into the practice, you increase your requirements for the quality of steam, quality of space, even the ritual cleanliness of the space, and so on. Same for Baltic countries, lots of great places. Same for Finland, of course, traditional sauna is over there. So in other parts of the world, it's a bit harder. So on one end, people are building saunas, and one can do that. One can really create a steam enclosure, and then basically finding the right stove and finding how to do it. That's perfectly feasible, or finding a nice spot. But I would say the answer to that is two things. One is learn somewhere where there is access to that, and the Steamology Institute is active in the United States as well, and we're going to have spots in next year in California and in Oregon, in Nevada, and hopefully in somewhere else too. So first of all, we are dealing with creating a network of spaces where we can learn. And the other thing is we are dealing with creating a network of spaces physically, like creating the spaces themselves. So the one you see on the screen is basically one of the first prototypes we made like a couple of years back that was operated in San Francisco Bay Area for a couple of years. And then we've got newer ones we are as commercially creating and shipping and whatever, and launching, helping launch them. So we welcome to contact us. At least we're going to advise where to go, how to start, but principally learn, have the first experience which makes you understand what it is really, that it is not really a fitness gym sauna. It's something else. There is a particular notion which is definitely absent in a usual fitness sauna. And once you have this experience, you're going to have the answer in what way you're going to need it, and it's definitely achievable with what is there in the market, with what we are doing, with what's going to be happening later. Or as well, ask the place you are frequenting to become interested in that. That's another way to do that, because in many sense it is a communal effort. And by just finding enough interested people who will say, wow, we'd love to have this engine for ourselves, for our town, for our community, for our retreat center, for whatever. And here, adding to what Yuri was asking, I am not advocating for it not working with other traditions. I am advocating against mixing, but you can work with different things. Understanding, if properly understood, how you connect things, then it can be a connection. There is a great connection to yoga, and actually it is written in some yogic texts, like Buddhist yogic texts show that some thermal procedures are actually important for some pranayamas. You have to do that, really, and but like it's good to be referring to something traditional or to someone knowledgeable about it. That's what I'm saying. So it's a great connection to a retreat center. That's another way. So ask us, we're going to help out. Look up Steamology Institute, look up Essential Steam. You're going to find us at festivals, of course. Contact us. That's a growing family of practitioners.
Beautiful. So we'll close shortly here, and yeah, that was my kind of, there's a will, there's a way, but it's sort of like Alexi's comments, like kind of that communal aspect, and then the ecology of practices is like find the others, and then this thing will find you and it'll help you find the others in a deeper way. And so hopefully the session will be of service to that. So if anyone is interested, please reach out to Boris. And just Alexis and Boris, any kind of thoughts you'd like to leave us with before we close formally?
Rosha?
I'm happy, Peter, for invitation at STOA, and I think that's an amazing place for sharing what we are experiencing right now at Steamology. And I, like, with humbleness and both with wonder, looking at what is emerging right now.
Okay, I would say, I think my ideal of a philosopher is pretty embodied. Like, I would think of antique philosophers, like you would think of, okay, Stoic philosopher, Marcus Aurelius, like the Greeks, all these folks, they had to be physically active. They had to be, like, just to travel to another town would take them, like, what they need to go, like this person, there's this level of physical connection to his or her person, to her body. It would now be called like a very extreme person, a very strange person, a triathlonist, a philosopher triathlonist. And I argue that perennial, like the eternal philosophy, really starts from being embodied. And that's why I would say my proposal would be, guys, let's do a STOA Steam space. We're gonna figure it out. Say it, Toronto, good one.
It's like I'm totally resonating and down for that, because it's like my favorite Stoic quote from Epictetus is, don't explain your philosophy, embody it. And this is pretty much the project of the Stoa, right? It's like kind of like blowing life into that essence. And on my mother's side, I have Russian heritage and Slavic. So this is like really just speaking to my tradition too. So yes, definitely a Stoa Banya Steam session is on the horizon. So yeah, I'll make some closing announcements in a moment. But Alexei, Boris, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Bringing your magic. Next session, we have Paul Kingsnorth coming in to talk about the virus and the machine. Might be a controversial session, so definitely check that out. And that being said, everyone, thank you so much for coming to the Stoa today.
Thank you.